Welcome back to Manager's Mike. I'm Paul Leon. I'm super excited about this podcast with Francie Jain. I've been preparing this for some time, done some research, and I know you're the owner, CEO of Terrawatt. It's a really cool story. What really impressed me about you is your value prop, but I don't want to take anything away. So tell me, who is Francie Jain? What is your mission at Terrawatt, your value prop? I was very impressed with it, but I always like to give you the voice since you're the star today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Let's see. It's a good question. Who am I? I am a person who, it took me a long time to figure out probably a lot of my strengths and my superpowers. And so now when I'm in this business, I'm really focused on making sure that it's easier for other people to get that, because it really changed the trajectory of my life. And I think it's so hard as an individual to realize what you have is different and unique than other people. And as a result, should lean into. I don't know, maybe this is boring, but I was going to Princeton. I'd had a bunch of careers. I kept switching because I was never really that engaged. And then I went to business school because I ended up in real estate where I was doing financial modeling, but I didn't really understand what I was talking about. I thought I should go to business school and not like pretend I understood what people were talking about. And so then at business school, I took the Myers-Briggs test. And for anyone who does personality tests, you'll probably find half the people poo-poo it and half the people really love it. And it's very big, especially in business school, because people like to know their monikers. Forget how it goes, like TI, JF, or what, they have all these little things. I always forget mine because ultimately, the big lesson for me in that is after the test, I came off as an off the charts extrovert. And that was big news to me because I never saw myself as an extrovert. But what it really spoke to is that I really value relationships. That's like my number one thing. And that was a main learning from the Myers-Briggs test. And I thought, oh, wow, I should really lean into that, because in business school, I was with a lot of very quant people. I went to Chicago and it's all about math. And that was on purpose. I went there to eat my vegetables and take calculus and economics with the derivatives and stuff. And that was great. But then I realized, wow, I can talk about finance and I can do the hard stuff and I understand it, but I can also be the translator for everyone else who isn't in the weeds the same way. And so that's what I had that role for a while. But then ultimately I got really interested in learning about what happens to people when a business goes away, when an industry goes away. And I heard a statistic about the decline in manufacturing in America. Since then, I've been paying attention to the statistics. And one of the really interesting ones is that American manufacturing peaked in the 1940s. And it's basically been coming down quite steeply since then. So anyone who had that as a career, many people in that space have had to find a new career. And I remember reading about that and thinking, wow, that's a lot of people looking for careers. Who's helping them? Because I thought, especially in America, we love capitalism. It's a boom and bust society. Things are always changing. And I thought, oh, that's so obvious. There must be someone helping those people. And I couldn't find it online. And at first I thought I must not know the right search terms, because I sort of had in my mind the Yahoo of career change. Couldn't find it. And then I started kind of getting obsessed with it. I was having dreams about it. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And just, this is wrong. This should exist. And then finally I sort of got to the point where I decided, okay, I'll just build it, even though I know nothing about any of this space, but because I care so much and I think it should exist. And I think there's an opportunity. Over the years, it has evolved and so many things changed, but now we are a B2B marketplace. It's called Terrawatt. And really what we do is we're kind of like Airbnb for executive coaching.
Okay.
We make it really easy to scale highly customized coaching. And, we have three kind of stakeholders. So we have coaches, and we have employers, employees. And so if you think about Airbnb, it's typically someone buying housing, renting housing, some sort of short-term rental for themselves. Whereas it's usually the employer buying the coach's expertise on behalf of their employee. And so it just changes the dynamic a little bit. It's also B2B, meaning we are selling to people who have a budget for professional development. What's really cool about this space, and one of the things that gets me more and more excited every day, is there's tons of data showing how group coaching or learning or professional development impacts the bottom line for organizations. We have tons of data about how it increases revenue, how it reduces burnout. And it's just crazy cool because there's no trade-off. It's not like you pay for this thing and you have to be okay with X. There's no trade-off, because professional development goes straight to the bottom line of the companies. It's much more productive than giving someone a $10,000 bonus. Maybe they go buy a couch or something, car, but where that doesn't really affect the business, maybe a little bit, but not the same way it would if they become much better at negotiating or much better at having tough conversations or all these other sort of human skills that most of us don't have or most of us aren't lesson.
I love how you kind of glanced over the fact you went to Princeton very quickly. So, Terrawatt now, if I understand correctly, you guys have over 10 coaches, if I counted correctly. Did a little research,
We're almost 100.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, I was way off. So you have a lot of experience. I know you mentioned Myers-Briggs. I'm actually just certified. That was kind of one of the first things I got
Oh,
certified in.
cool.
But I mean, I love them all. And I kind of connected with you on you said you either love it or you hate it. I see that a lot in business where you have this great divide of trainers. Sometimes they love that stuff. Sometimes they hate that stuff. There's always that excuse of enabling excuses. You've seen a lot of different situations. I can tell you're very passionate about this, and that what excites me about doing this podcast with you. What are some of those common denominators you would say from coaching so many different businesses that leaders can kind of spot quickly? Because morale starts to slip at some point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 90 days. I think you had mentioned data. I know Society of Human Resources says 1 in 4 people leave just from a toxic manager. Maybe you can kind of coach me or coach someone who hears this to say, here are some key signs we see and why this is an important investment quick.
If you don't have a program for professional development for your employees, you can expect to have higher than average turnover in your industry, period. First of all, just all humans stay longer with professional development offerings within their company. And then to be more specific, Gen Z expects professional development from their employer. And so if you have a cultural divide, or if you have a generational divide, or if a few people, even one person a year is leaving for burnout, that's an organizational problem. More people will be leaving. That burnout is tied to patient and customer outcomes experience. There's another group called Work Institute. And every year they put out a retention report, and and every year it's always a little different, and people answer it slightly differently. But the top 3 reasons people leave is more money, professional development, and career growth. You can get more money somewhere else, you can get developed better somewhere else, or you get a promotion. And the more I think about that is professional development doesn't cost you anything, and it'll keep you all those people who say they're leaving. It'll probably keep you the people who say they're leaving for money. Because I always think about it like, if I were in that position, and I had been in the past, you might just tell someone you're leaving because you're getting paid more because you don't want to go into it. But there's like a lot of reasons that you're leaving, right? Because if someone's willing just to pay you a slight bit more, that means where you are is really terrible. You know what I mean? And so I think if people are claiming money is the reason they're leaving, like that's a bad sign for your organizational structure and your culture. And actually there's a group I just connected with. They actually can do almost like a forecasting about that based on different onboardings, and they can kind of give numbers to how much turnover you should expect. I think the other thing I would say is you also know you have got something's going on organizationally, systemically, if you have a steady turnover, right? If every year you're seeing like 15% employee turnover, well, then something's happening, because if you had 4% employee turnover, that would be A+, but you don't. So why not? And so those are the kinds of things I would say.
So your sales value prop is you help lower turnover in hospitals, and you're pretty big on LinkedIn. Your accolades are through the roof. Is there a time now where the demand for the problem you're solving is going outside of the hospital industry, you're saying? Or is there more there to that? I know I just kind of a surprise question.
No, it's a great
that
question.
Came from the heart. I wanted to ask.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we market to hospitals and healthcare and senior living because they have a high employee turnover rate. And we know it can be a lot lower. Those industries typically look at turnover as just like cost of doing business. And so right now, the average turnover for all of healthcare is 20%, but it's even higher for senior living and home health and those, the sort of more senior community aspects of healthcare. So it costs them a lot of money. And the more that you can reduce it, but what's ironic is you're reducing your turnover by making people happy. It's not the same happiness as providing free sodas, but it's the kind of happiness that can stay and actually affect the bottom line and actually really matters. One of our really good long-term clients is a tech company in Seattle. And they just actually, when we first sort of talked to them, they're really interested in upskilling people who didn't have college degrees because they were really
Oh,
interested
really?
in not
That's
hiring
cool.
that population, which was super cool. And then they realized, sure, of course it'd be great to have coaching for those people, but doing one-on-one coaching is really expensive. And we're like, thank you. That's our whole point. And so what we say is, yeah, you can get the same expert who your CEO is learning from, but if you have 20, 30, 40 people learning from that expert live, either in person or via, Zoom or whatever, then they're learning the same stuff that your CEO knows. It's just more in line with the budget for that level of employee. So another way I talk about it is if you have a budget for people to go to conferences for less money than going to a conference, you can have group coaching per person and then learn real stuff and practice real stuff and use it with their peers as opposed to sitting on their butt listening to people speak on a panel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my sort of pitch. But yeah, I mean, 100%. We love to work with anyone who's interested in it, especially people who the best candidate for us is anyone who wants to see the return on investment, the ROI. They want to see what the change is because we can really do that for them. That's really fun. And it's kind of finding ways to, quantify it and make it so that the finance guys are excited about it. And, one of my big pitches is, well, human capital investment should be looked at the same way, R&D investment, the same way, you name it, marketing, anything that you invest in the business context has an ROI. And so does human capital. It just typically isn't talked about that way. And I think that's an opportunity for us and for everyone.
So you work in the hospital industry, it's accepted that 20%. It's kind of like the cost, right? What I'm trying to kind of connect the dots around is when you're working with your coaches, you're kind of seeing those common denominators. What would be transferable that you've seen from the hospital industry? Because you also have a finance
Yeah.
background. What are some of those transferable things that coaches kind of have in common? Man, I keep hearing this same challenge over and over again. And if they just waved a magic wand and solved it
Yeah.
over 6 months, 12 months, this would give them so much money back.
Yeah.
And I have a second part to that question, but I don't want to overwhelm you.
Yeah.
So I don't know
No,
if
I
you have
know.
any
It's like
follow
yeah.
up to what I just
So,
asked.
what are
Yeah.
some common problems that people struggle with as employers? Well, the thing the reason I bring up the Gen Z thing is you hear this a lot. Gen Z, they don't do eye contact. They don't know how to speak on the phone. It's an endless sort of rant. But I just feel like, okay, then you just need to train them because they need to set expectations for what they need to know. And that also always connects to when you hear people say, we just can't find qualified applicants, which makes me laugh every time. Because why don't you just pick someone who seems thoughtful and can do and teach them what you need them to do?
Yeah.
It's absurd. So I think there's just a lack of creativity with hiring, I guess. I don't really know what is going on. The thing I always say about Gen Z is they're different from, for sure, baby boomers, right, for sure. But they're product of all of American society. So my joke always is, we talk about great cultures and work-life balance and all these things we all want. Gen Zs are true believers. They're like, yeah, I like that too. And we're like, no, that's not actually how it works. No, you misunderstood. It's not about any of that. And Gen Z's like, what are you talking about? I think that they are kind of asking everyone to really live up to what we run around talking about. Whereas I'm a Gen X and I've worked my whole life for baby boomers, and we're always, you tell me to jump and I say how high. There was no pushback, and I think that that's not particularly healthy, especially if you disagree. And then the other thing I would say is psychological safety, which is basically the holy grail that every organization is aiming to get, and we learned that from Google, is achieved by letting people have different viewpoints. And I think to assume that, being someone's boss is dominating them all the time and telling them what to do without any feedback or compromise is not working with Gen Z. But it shouldn't have to work with anyone, because I think that's kind of the point of psychological safety. Everyone should be able to get out their thoughts, and maybe they disagree, but then they still have to complete the assignment. And listen, I'm not the boss of very many Gen Z people, but I have seen a little bit, and they have a different perspective than what I sort of expect to be a working professional way. But it sort of challenges me when the times when I've had that, it challenges me to be more articulate about what I'm trying to say.
I connect with you on psychological safety simply because part of the big reason I started this podcast was because long time ago I was part of a psychologically unsafe environment, just trying to connect with you. So I'm in an MBA program online, going through that. That's just been my own, you know, stake in the ground, want to get better type Paul Leon after the experience outside of this podcast. And the first class I took in management foundations, half the book was in psychological safety. It was kind of an interesting journey I had. The reason I bring it up and the reason I want to bring it up, even though this isn't in my notes, is to say to you, do you feel remote work is contributing more? Because there's also this war on remote work. I'm seeing that a lot in the
Oh,
news and the media,
yeah.
where maybe people want that more and that's contributing to psychological safety that people can't have it? Or is it just there's a trust factor? Is it just a lack of insecurity from certain individuals higher up? I'm just trying to kind of get a pulse check on maybe it's the remote work. Maybe there's something else I'm not seeing because you can't learn everything in school.
What the remote work and the virtual work that like fight, the in-person versus virtual, is fascinating. And so your question is, how does psychological safety play into that? Or is it a different question?
How does it play into, is psychological or, so here, I'll give you a better example. So there was a big time CEO I was working with who's like, I don't believe in remote work.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, well, why? He said, there's no way that people are working 8 hours a day. This was his theory. But then he would be remote all week and expect everybody else to come in. I'm a big believer in do be have. I think you need to do something. That's how you learn best. I think you also set an example. Like I got 2 kids. They see me when I work around the house. They see me turn off the TV and not always watch TV. You have to be that example. And I'm not saying your employees are your kids, but I'm just wondering if there's a version of this story where people are more sensitive because they don't get enough remote work.
Mm.
And I'm kind of playing devil's advocate a little to be
It
on
is,
that
okay,
person's
it is
side.
so interesting. I mean, I think that like problem is that I don't think there's any one answer to it, but I do think it's fair for an employer to say, these are my terms of employment. I think the problem we all had was when everyone went remote 100%, some organizations would say, oh, we're going remote forever and ever and ever to keep people because of the Great
That
Resignation.
was crazy.
They're like, oh, we don't want to lose anyone. You can live from Idaho and work in New York, no problem. And then within a year or two ago, right, everyone started to go back. I think that's really unfair to employees. How do you trust your employer if they're like, yeah, live in Maine or live wherever you want to live and no big deal? So that's a problem. So you just completely changed a massive life decision of somebody because they were like, that's great. I will live in Idaho or will live in Maine and work in New York. I think that's a big problem. But on the other side, I think it's perfectly fair to say, I need you to be in the office, but you have to say why. So one of the things I've been seeing
Okay, I
is
like that.
organizations will just say, I believe it's better that way, like, or using data to show that. But I think part of it is that they're afraid because they might actually be having software on people's like computers showing when they're not active. So they may actually
I've
have
seen
data
that.
that they're not working. But then the other part of it is sometimes people bring people back from remote because they want people to quit because it's almost firing, the way for people to self-select out. And so there's so many different reasons. Finance in New York, and especially banking, has always been incredibly in person. It was just sort of luxury, it seemed to me, when people had this like remote work thing. And listen, you're always welcome. People are always welcome to negotiate their own package. Then the other side is, I think a balance is healthy for everyone. We're humans. We thrive on social stuff. Even if you're an introvert, you still get a lot out of connecting with people, or maybe just saying hi to somebody, like chatting in passing, or maybe there's a reason to come in. I just think it just needs to be a lot more thoughtful. And I think what makes me crazy is when it feels like employers are trying just to dominate their employees. And that's when I get kind of grossed out because I feel like there's no real reason for you to do this. You just feel like you should justify the rent. And if that's the case, and just sublet that space. I just think that people just need to get more creative. And when I see the press and the companies that are making people go back, it always feels very jerky to me and not sort of thoughtful and saying, this is what we believe and this is why. I think if you came out and said that very explicitly and you talked about the data you look at, I think people would respect them more. But when they sort of make it sound like a rant, I don't want to be a part of.
What does good creative look like, though? Because that's what comes to my mind versus bad creative. Because creative is such a broad term, and better than what you do day in, day out. Are you able to kind of give me a little insight on what does good creative look like? Like after 90 days, you get a gift card, or is it kind of
No, creative is consistent feedback from employees and then acting on their suggestions. And this also ties into my business. We found that when we have a survey, so because we do three stakeholders, right? There's an employer buying group coaching for these other people. The buyer may think that the people need something the people don't think they need, the employees. And that happens all the time. Typically, as part of our process, we send a survey to the employees to confirm that they want their colleague or boss is buying for them. Then we have them like rank titles and do all sorts of different things so that we just have a sense of like what the group's interested in. It's been really interesting to us because when we do that, we have much more engagement in the session because people feel like, A, they voted for what they wanted. They were told what everyone said. They kind of understood their relationship to the group. And then they were given customized things for exactly what they want, not some dumb thing that someone's just selling. It's really like based on like what they wanted and what could really help them. Those sessions work really well. When you don't ask the employees, there's a lot of people sitting there with their arms crossed who are pissy and who don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for the coach, the leader, whatever, because it's a very different experience when you need to like constantly delight someone who doesn't want to hear it from you versus someone who wants to be delighted. That's what I mean by creativity is like maybe there's a third way, maybe there can be a back to work group and they can come up with ideas and ways to make it more interesting for employees and less kind of like top down hierarchical. Then everyone kind of feels happy because they've arrived at a really thoughtful solution as opposed to this is wrong. This is not the way I did it when I was 22. Like that kind of stuff. I just think it's stupid. Yeah. And I always thought all this COVID stuff was just an opportunity to be super creative about like these solutions. I think it was just one of these assumptions we all had that work was in person and being professional was, what you did in the office. I think being professional is being a good citizen in the office more than being in the office or like having a shield.
I like that. I always imagine on some level, I'm going to play devil's advocate only because I feel Princeton, you're CEO, you've got over 100 coaches, you're in the game. I feel like you can handle it. There's always going to be the critic of this. And I feel like the critic doesn't come from a place of knowing their data.
Right, true.
54% of, if a person is remote for 1 week, and I didn't plan to go to this conversation, I'm just kind of getting excited just talking, but 54% of carbon emissions is saved to somebody who's remote a week. That's a pretty big statistic.
That's interesting. Great statistic. Yeah.
And what's exciting to me to kind of hear you say this is that I feel like a lot of this stuff on remote, I have seen a therapist for 40 plus appointments, all remote. I had never met my therapist in person when I went through the COVID experience. And I never went because I was remote, but there's still that person who's probably like, yeah, but I don't think so. But to kind of move the needle for that person who may never change their mind, and we'll probably never do it. That's always going to be a moving target. But if we could try to wave a magic wand and tell that person, you're not considering these things in your decisions, what would you say to that super critic?
The one thing often you'll see these statistics where they'll say things like, so-and-so found that brainstorming is 85% more effective in person. And I always think, all right, if they tested post-pandemic, you have no way of knowing where these numbers are coming from. It's just crazy to say that in person is better if what you're doing physically making something. If it's really just discussing, you know what I mean? Maybe there's some people feel more comfortable being next to a person to do something. I don't really have that experience. And I know 100% what you're talking about. I have complete relationships with many, many people now. I've never met them in person, or I'll meet them after a year of working with them. And I think it's definitely possible to create really strong relationships with people. I just think there should be more data and more study about what is happening over virtual and and what do we know as best practices? I mean, that's the other thing I always think. Whenever these statistics come out and they'll say the average, blah, 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 and you're like, okay, the average, but what we want to know is who's doing A plus and how can we all do the A plus? If the average is not helpful. The average just tells you what's happening in the background. What if it's something like, the best practices for brainstorming the Zoom session are 1 through 10. And everyone's like, great, let's try that. Or you obviously are doing an A+ job with your therapist because you feel really connected to this person and you've had 40 sessions and you want to keep going and you feel like that person's really helping you solve your problems. Like, that sounds like a really good solution to me. It's funny because I used to have a therapist. I got graduated, which I felt very proud about. but started with in person, and then on the pandemic, it went virtual. And I remember
Oh,
thinking
really?
how similar it was. This is just the same thing. Because I was in California and she was in New York, and so it just had to be virtual. It worked super fine. And I just thought that was so interesting, and I never would have thought that. We're
Yeah.
really in a brave new world of the virtual. That's the other thing I would say to the naysayers is I just don't think we have that much data about it. I don't think there's a lot of studies about what it shows. I remember Morgan reported during COVID that they actually had an increase in productivity when everyone went virtual because they
How funny is
right
that? How funny is
commuting,
that?
they were working after, they were working after dinner, they're working, working before breakfast. That's why some of these statistics are, I think, really cherry picked. Because were they reporting that because it was a news item and they just wanted to show everyone that JP Morgan was doing well? But then why wouldn't that influence Jamie Dimon to get
Diamond.
more
Yeah.
excited about maybe finding some other solution? Again, that's his choice and that's your choice to work at that organization. I just think the switching is so unfair and seems to me it would be really angry making if you were an employee. He also said about the CEO, like someone's like not there, but they're saying like, do as I say, not as I do. Why would I want to listen to anything you say? You sound untrustworthy.
When it comes to psychological safety, I think bait and switch contributes to the harmfulness of
Yeah.
psychological safety. Do you happen to know in your data, or if you were to estimate the cost to save just one person in an organization, the ideal customer who comes in and says, all right, Francie, I want to hire Terrawatt. I want to make the investment. What is the cost savings in your experience? And maybe you could speak to not just money. You kind of already touched on a
Yeah.
lot of this. I believe it repeats itself. That's totally fine. Repetition is the mother of learning. But what I'm trying to also get at, and you can speak to costs if you're comfortable, is what are the cost savings to just saving just one person? And then an employer or an HR manager or whoever can say, man, if that was done for 10 people,
Yeah.
then 50 people, whatever. Could you speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah. So we have this one incredible case study that I love to talk about. One of our Terrawatt coaches, he's a PhD and his dad was a PhD too. And they basically came up with like a framework for group coaching and it's called opposite strengths. And what's interesting is he doesn't speak about it like as psychological safety, but it basically is. It's basically just saying, listen, hey, Francie, one of your strengths is being an extrovert. You might say one of your weaknesses is being an introvert. For someone, that's their strength. And how can you guys come together and use that? Showing how the different sides of these sort of binary descriptions are ways to increase everything good. Productivity, collaboration, de-siloing, all that stuff. So anyway, he has this program.
Okay.
It was used with a hospital system in Colorado. The average employee turnover for hospitals is 20%. Every year, 20% leaves, which is pretty high. Just in absolute terms, their number was 24%. They were in a small town. They weren't in like Denver. They had a problem because how can they keep getting people to come to this sort of smallish town? They were saying to themselves, something really needs to change here because this is unsustainable for us. And they didn't make my understanding is they didn't make the decision based on retained earnings, but that's sort of the punchline here. But they started with 24% and they were doing this opposite strengths training with this guy, Dr. Thomas, and his content. And it's especially helpful in a hierarchical society structure like hospitals where doctors kind of like run things and everyone kind of sort of responds to them. You can imagine how that could get toxic where the whole structure is this hierarchy. They were doing this training. It was opt-in, optional. The CEO did as well. And every year they were able to reduce 1% to 2% turnover. And after 9 years, they had 4% employee turnover, which is effectively zero. It just means people retiring or leaving for reasons that you can't influence, like family or whatever. And it also meant it was really easy to hire people because someone would just tell their friend, hey, I work at this awesome hospital. And then they also started to win awards because their metrics got so good. They're investing some money in coaching. It's group coaching. Everyone's learning from each other. It's being directed by a coach. They get down to 4%. And because they had 4,500 employees and they were in the healthcare space, meaning they were probably doing a lot of traveling nurses, which is expensive, overtime or stuff. The difference from 24% turnover to 4% turnover was $32 million a year.
Holy smokes.
And so
32
that is
million.
crazy, right? Because what I always say is that could be a new fancy building every year. You could give everyone raises. You can give everyone bonuses. You could decide every year, what are we going to do with our $32 million a year? And it's a trade-off. There's no downside because Then they were winning awards. They could hire whoever they wanted. They were spending less on recruiting. It was just all upside. It made them a better organization. And so that's kind of my whole
Yeah.
pitch, where it's not a nice to have because you have extra revenue. It will bring you extra revenue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the opposite. It's not cool. We'll do that if we have some money lying around. It will repay itself after a few months or a year. And then it becomes an investment like any other corporate investment.
Absolutely. One of the things I will give Generac credit where credit's due, I'll flex on their behalf a little, is I do like that they have different burgs. You got a women's burg. They're really big about that. And guys can go to the women's burg. I do think those are good creative things, kind of going
Wait,
back
what
to
about?
that
Tell me more.
topic.
I don't know about this. Wait, sorry.
Business employee resource
Oh,
group.
sure. Oh,
So
yeah, the
they
ERGs. Yeah,
have
yeah.
that.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, they call it a
Okay.
burg. It's kind of interesting. My wife works education. You should connect with her on LinkedIn. I guess in education, it's ERG,
Oh, I
employee
see.
resource groups. In business, don't quote
Yeah.
me on this. I could be wrong. Business employee resource groups. That's what that means on a plain level. I have a two-part question for you. I'm getting excited. It's weird. I always get like nerded out by this
Yeah.
stuff. My degree, when I was a college dropout, I went back and I wanted to figure out what I wanted. Organizational behavior for some reason
cool.
just really resonated with me. So that's why I kind of nerd
Yeah.
out on this. You've had some cool career transitions. You have a lot of good experience, but you're still very strong. You're young. My first part question is, what in your definition, because you have so many coaches, what are those key things you look for that says like, that's a good coach?
Yes, I love this question. So it took a while to figure out how to define what I had. Basically, what it is, we look for talented coaches. And then we have our own kind of definition of what that means. We don't have any minimum educational requirements. We have some coaches who are PhDs and have fancy certifications. And we have some coaches who graduated from high school and that's it. Because really what we're looking for is people that know how to make change and they care about people growing. And that their content is appropriate for a B2B audience. Those are probably the key things. They have their own, they're develop their own content. They're really clear about the value they offer and who they are. Typically, these people have their own website, social media presence. They're, I would say, 90% full-time coaches. We have some people who are like professors, like coaching on the side or something like that. But yeah, so we just look for talented people. We have our own like special sauce for figuring that out. We do background checks to make sure they, not on America's Most Wanted or wire fraud. And then the other thing is like, they have to fit. For instance, if someone's that kind of leads on religious lines, that's a harder sell for us because that's a little bit harder for an organization to pick up. And same with somebody who's doing resume stuff. Even personal branding is on the edge, but as long as you do something else that's executive presence, which is very similar to personal brand, but executive presence is a much more B2B appropriate way of saying it. Because you just never want anyone in an organization to think, well, is this going to make my employees like contribute more to my organization, or is this going to make my employees want to leave? But I think that's all saying our process. One of the things I found, it's not 100%, but it's often the case that really good coaches are not great marketers because they are so interested in like realness and helping people one-on-one that to them, a lot of the social media stuff feels sort of fake and surfacey. That's really interesting to me. So when I speak to somebody and they're like, I love your model because I just want to be coaching all the time. I don't want to be doing marketing. Then I know that person really believes in what they're doing, because if all you wanted was to do all sorts of marketing and get paid checks and then not do anything, you'd be pretty happy with the marketing side. And so that's something I could say. I think anyone who's offering something that's a quick fix probably doesn't have a lot to offer. I don't see too many people like that, but I assume they're out there. I've come across a few people in the past where they're like, oh, well, if you sell my platform, I'll give you blah, blah, blah. They're trying to syndicate out the sales in a weird way. That always to me is a sign that I don't know if that's really real, because wouldn't they have repeat customers or word of mouth referrals? And my other joke is, in the beginning, people would really touch my heart with the things they would say. Who's your ideal customer? What's some success you've had? Can you give me an example? And in the beginning, like, everyone was making me cry because it was just like so beautiful, the stuff they were saying. And so that's like part of it too. I don't always spend time with all the coaches, but I often feel like I'm really touched by how they speak about their practice and what they're trying to do for their clients. And it really is a beautiful, because I mean, there's no more kind of beautiful thing, I think, than being a cheerleader for someone else's life, helping them grow. I think that's just so beautiful. So I still look for people who think about it as not necessarily like calling, but something they really work on and they live it and they work on it and they're just real and authentic and aligned and all that kind of stuff.
Humans are, I think we forget sometimes that humans are very good at sniffing out intent. You got that person who comes to your house and he's 50% cheaper for some reason. There's these experiences that kind of make that up. So for a couple weeks, I'm interviewing this other military leader. And I kind of vet out who I want to have on the podcast now because I'm very kind of strict too. One of the things that he says, if we just help one person,
Yeah.
that's all that matters, whether corporate or not. When you kind of went through this journey, what were the changes you saw in yourself personally by being a coach? Because sometimes people
Yeah.
struggle with things like imposter syndrome. A lot of the times I feel, and I don't want to speak for females because I'm not female, I feel that sometimes I hear a lot from female
Oh,
studies that
oh
I'll study
yeah.
in school that they feel the most imposter syndrome. So what were those things that you saw in your own personal life going through this journey, having 100 coaches, that when I went through this is where Francie's lift came from, this experience that
Yeah.
bled into other personal
Yeah.
parts, because not everybody who may hear this may work in
Yeah,
corporate.
I love that. Oh, that's a great question. Well, one epiphany I had recently is if there's something that you think is a good idea that's expensive that you can't do or you can't learn, just back burner it.
Okay.
That is a big epiphany that finally occurred to me. Like there are a lot of cool things you could do. I think the key thing with business is nobody cares except that you have revenue. So you have to, that's the number one thing. And how can you do it just in the most basic way? And then everything can get more sophisticated as you grow. It's funny because with the imposter syndrome, it's a really good question. I agree with you. I actually think more women do have it. And my take a little bit on imposter syndrome is that women have less examples in their memory of people helping them helping them grow or giving them the benefit of the opportunity, benefit of the doubt. When someone has given them the benefit of the doubt, there's a whole statistic that women get promoted based on what they've done and men get promoted based on their potential. When women have that
Interesting.
situation where they're promoted based on their potential, I think it probably freaks them out a little bit. Because when has this ever happened to me before? I'm not in the right position. Because what they're realizing is they just have to grow into the role. And everyone for eons has done that before, but just in that person's life, they just haven't been given that many opportunities to grow. That's my theory. I would just say that sometimes it's really scary growing. What got you here is not what's going to get you there. You always have to be changing. You're going to have to grow if you want to do something different and move in a different direction than where you are now. And so that's what growth is, right? Learning new ways to do it, being uncomfortable. And like the other thing I learned about entrepreneurship is that nobody knows everything. When they talk about entrepreneurs in these articles and stuff, people seem like Superman. And the thing is, no, they knew about software. That was it.
Yeah.
I always laugh because one guy who knew like software and then he's having trouble selling and you're like, shocker. He's never done sales. I just think all these skills that are really, really valuable. Marketing, copywriting, an epiphany I had recently. I think there are almost like two kinds of startups. One where you see an opportunity in the market. You say, I don't see vegan dog food here. We should really start selling that. That's a trade or an opportunity that's like plugging a hole. That's one kind of business. That is not my business. My business is much more values driven and this is what I think should be. And I think that those businesses are actually harder, the values driven one, because it took me a long time to even figure out the business model. Now I'm so excited about it because I'm really clear on the business model and everything's aligned in the way I want it to be. And it's all in line with my values and I'm not compromising. I'm going to hit the ground running and there's some virality to it. So ours is getting the word out. Good and bad that no one's heard of like coaching or a coaching marketplace. It's good because we don't really have direct competitors, but it's bad because nobody's like thinking about it that way. And so you have to
Yeah.
decide if that's okay to be in that position where you're kind of educating people.
I don't want to use your words, but I'm just curious. You want this business, I imagine, Terrawatt. It's mission driven. It's very successful. If for some reason you were ever to, I don't want this to happen. Just want to be clear what I'm going to say. But if some reason you weren't here, which would make a lot of people sad, what do you want to do without you?
I always think about the age of the company. Not a lot it's been around,
Yeah.
but like if it were a child, it's kind of third grader right now. What I'm trying to do is get this thing graduate from high school and graduate from college so that like it can be on its own and I'm not pushing it forward. Right now, it can eat on its own. It can kind of get places if it needs to. but it's still like requiring a fair bit of like parental help. And so what I'm just trying to do is like make it kind of operating without me pushing it forward. It's the independence of spirit kind of. And so that's really my goal.
Awesome. Tell people where they can follow you, some CTAs. It's very important that people find you.
We talk a lot on the website about hospitals, but that's just because we think there's a huge opportunity based on the turnover. But that doesn't have to be the
Absolutely.
reason that you want to talk to us. It could be a business of 4 people that want to do better at having hard conversations, or it could be a sales team, somebody who has a group in mind. The group can be anything. It could be a VRG, it could be affinity group, it could be a team, it could be seniority level and goal. That's what I'm looking for, is people who really are looking to develop their employees or their colleagues and be a believer in the rising tide, because this isn't a dominating business. It really is about
Right.
lifting
I'm with
everyone
you.
up. I think as long as you have that mentality, you'll get along well with the stuff that we're doing here, because we're not trying to take advantage of anyone anywhere. And then they can find me. We have a get in touch page on Terrawatt, and just terrawatt.co.
Yep.
And then I'm on LinkedIn, and you can connect me there. I always think the C-level people I think would be interested in speaking to me are people who like know the cost of their employee turnover annually. And I can say to them,
Awesome. Yep.
what if you drop that by 85%? Would that be valuable? Because that's what our case
Okay.
studies show. But one
Which
thing,
is really
it was
strong.
crazy. But one of the things that's interesting though is that a lot of people don't even quantify their turnover because they just assume it's just a cost of business. So they don't even
Right.
know what it is. And that's a whole other cohort that needs to learn a little bit about how to just understand their organization better and what's happening.
I know I'm very happy to be connected with you, and I look forward to trying recommending your business because you get these results, you have the intent. Biggest takeaway for me is the intent,
Mm,
and you're getting that. And so if you know your numbers and you really want to make a change or group coaching, I would say connect with Francie
yeah.
immediately. That's Paul's perspective on it. Yeah.